I'm joined by Amber Saint from Impact Pro Wrestling. Amber, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us about any shows coming up or in the past at all.
Sure. So I'm Amber Saint, and I am a wrestler based in New Zealand, where I primarily wrestle for Impact Pro Wrestling. We recently had a show last weekend. It was our first ever double header. So we had a show on Friday and Saturday at Mount Albert War Memorial Hall in Auckland, and that culminated in IPW's annual Fans Bring the Weapons match. Which was for the heavyweight championship. Yeah.
Right, okay.
So it was fun and chaotic. Absolutely loved it. And we have a show coming up on October 22nd, also at Mount Albert War Memorial Hall. And I will be wrestling in the first ever women's casket match in New Zealand.
Right, yeah, that's quite an accolade then to actually participate in that, the first ever casket match. So just going back to that previous statement there, fans bring the weapons match. I must admit, I've never heard of that. So what was the, peculiar items that had be brought?
Right. So it's gone back to 2002, I think, was the first ever one. And IPW has pretty much done it annually ever since. You do get some interesting, there were two separate shopping trolleys that were brought in, absolutely filled with random things. Someone had made a stick out of Pringles cans.
yeah, it's using their initiative, whatever, I'm
they get really into it and they get really creative with what they bring in, so it's always interesting.
I'm all for it. I mean, we've all remember Al Snow with his mannequin head, so nothing's out of the ordinary, to be honest.
Yeah.
So what actually brought you into wrestling itself, Amber? Like not like you wrestling physically, but just your interest. What piqued your interest? Did you find it accidentally, or did you actually research it? What happened?
So I started watching it because my dad was always in control of what we watched on TV. He was in charge of what we're watching on Sky, and he started watching wrestling. And so me and my brother just kind of started watching it with him. And this was back in 2004. And when I think about the kind of main storylines going on at the time, it's definitely not aged very well.
There's a lot from the attitude and ruthless aggression that I don't think could really fly right now.
Yeah, so when I think about the stories that I remember first seeing, and it kind of concerns me that I was like, yeah, this is really interesting. This is really cool. But I got hooked on it because I was really into Lita growing up. I had never really seen someone like her with the colorful hair and the tattoos and the way she dressed. So there was something about her. I feel like I saw her and I was like, I want to look like her when I'm older.
Yeah, I think it's really impressive and really special that the likes of Lita and Trish, that kind of stuff, because back then women didn't really have much of a spotlight unless it was for a certain angle, but we're not going to go down that route, you know what I mean, back then. Yeah. But now you've got all the stars coming through, Rhea Ripley, you've got Becky Lynch, everyone coming through, and it's really nice to see the full turnaround of they probably looked up to them, and now this generation's breaking through. It's really something to turn around. But yeah, Lita, I remember her with the Hardys. She was real special. Was it her and Trish they headlined the first ever female Raw main event?
Yeah, so they had their main event match, and I remember watching that because that was in the first year that I started watching wrestling, and that was probably the first time that I thought, I actually would love to do wrestling. Yeah. I mean, I was a kid, and you still, when I grew up, I'm going to be a professional wrestler. That was probably the first time I thought about that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I often thought that I grew up to be like Stone Cold Steve Austin, but here I am with hair and chubby, so I don't think that's really going to happen. So how did that? I know you just said then that you're wanting to grow up and be a professional wrestler, but did the transition come a little bit later, where you started really honing your craft and learning the ropes? Pardon the pun.
Yeah, so I started training to wrestle in 2016. I had just graduated from university, and I did a communications degree. And as part of that degree, I was on the student radio station. And I ended up interviewing someone that I went to school with who was doing wrestling. She was wrestling in New Zealand, and she had also been over to Japan, and I believe the UK as well. So that was kind of my reintroduction to wrestling in New Zealand, because growing up, there's this expo called Armageddon, and it's a pop culture expo in New Zealand, and they had local wrestling there at the time, along with like the occasional WWE person would be there. So I had seen New Zealand wrestling, but I guess I kind of had forgotten about it. And then, yeah, I did this interview and it kind of was back at the forefront of my brain. And, you know, like I had just graduated uni and I was like, what am I doing with my life? I hadn't gotten a job for like 6 months afterwards. So I was like, well, I'll go and do this to kind of have something to pursue in the meantime. And here I am 6 years later.
Yeah, something to chase though, you know, like it, because it's your dream, but you know, hats off to you. You're actually out there, you're actually doing it, you know, you're living your dream and a dream to many young kids around the world, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So what's your like training schedule like? Do you have a very strict one, or like is it just for upcoming shows or something?
So IPW actually has a training school based in Auckland. At the moment, we're in between gyms. So we're based in West Auckland, and I do training at that wrestling gym once a week, very focused on in-ring stuff, in-ring cardio, in-ring conditioning, and then working on my moves and matches and all that kind of stuff. And then outside of wrestling, I go to the gym 3 to 4 times a week where I'm doing like strength training and cardio and all that stuff. Like I do enjoy going to the gym. Like I find it quite therapeutic, but nothing can train you for wrestling training, like wrestling matches, like actual wrestling training. Like there's nothing in the gym really that you can do to replicate it.
Yeah, there's no hard mat there or anything like that. Or there's not, you know what I mean? I suppose you don't get whiplash machine off a raw bench, you know what I mean? It just doesn't really happen that much.
No.
So I was looking into, you know, some of your matches and your highlights and things. Your character is quite dark, like a gothic sort of culture, if you will. Like, how did you build that character? Is there something in there, you know, that's extracted from your personality, or is it in something that you built on, or is it made from scratch?
It is very much me turned up to 100. I have always been into and interested in like that alternative aesthetic and subculture, going back to like Evanescence back in like the early 2000s. Like I remember seeing that and thinking that was the coolest ever, and that was like the gateway into, like, I was really big on like the emo scene of the 2000s, so like My Chemical Romance and all that kind of stuff. Tim Burton movies, very formative things in my childhood, and it's stuff that I kind of like repressed in my teens and early adulthood because it you know, it's not cool, right? Like I obviously got like picked on at school for being weird and all that kind of stuff. So it's been very cathartic to just fully embrace that side of me. And I feel like through doing that in wrestling, it's allowed me to embrace that in my life outside of it as well.
Yeah, it's a really cool thing though, you know, for it to come right round, because like you say, I know the My Chemical Romance days and the Amy Lee, Evanescence, that kind of stuff. And, you know, I was quite into it myself. And but I think you're right in what you're saying. You know, there's you get kind of suppressed a little bit. You can't really just enjoy it for what it is, especially back then. I'm not so sure what it's like for kids growing up now, but it's really cool and it's kind of wholesome that it's come right round. Now you can really explore that character. And a lot of people, you know, they kind of love looking at that now. Like, I don't know, look at Rhea Ripley, something like that.
Exactly.
You know, I know she might not be quite, you know, what we're describing, but you know, around that kind of that goal era.
Yeah.
See, I remember the Gangrel character of
yes.
you know, like
the Brood with like the blood and the vampires.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. I don't think I've ever seen Gangrel win a match, but you know, that's another story.
But you always remember him, right?
Oh yeah, you always remember the absolute characters and the personas that they had during back in them days, because there was plenty of them anyway. Speaking of which, do you watch the current product of WWE itself nowadays?
I try to. I have got the WWE Network, and I will watch the pay-per-views, especially if they're being talked about quite a lot online. I watch a bit of AEW, and then also I will watch a bit of Stardom, which is a all-women's promotion in Japan, and that's kind of as much as I can get in without taking up too much of my time watching wrestling each week.
Yeah, because we were talking about this on another video. It's almost as if there's a bit too much wrestling for let's just say just WWE. You've got Raw, SmackDown, NXT. You've got all the pay-per-views, and Raw and SmackDown are like 3 hours long as well. It's a lot when you're working, and especially for yourself when you've got the gym and then you're training and everything like that. It's quite a lot of time to invest, isn't it?
Yeah, and like I want to watch other TV shows too. Like I want to watch like House of the Dragon and whatever else is going on at the moment.
Yeah, this is it, isn't it? Like if we were to sit and absorb every single minute, then I don't think we'd have much time. That's why sometimes I think I look back at the Attitude Era with the rose tinted glasses, because obviously I was a lot younger then and I could sit there and just absorb it. It's not as if I had to go out to work and pay rent, just sit there with my Cocoa Pops watching DX do the thing. That just seems how it is. So the current product today, from the bits that you have seen, are you happy with the product, or would you tweak it somehow, especially with the Triple H coming in? Like, is there any changes you'd like to see?
Well, I think I was like a lot of WWE fans up until recently, where it was like disgruntled, but still watching it anyway.
I know what you mean.
But with Triple H coming in and the changes you can see implemented, it's very exciting. It feels like hopeful, that people that weren't necessarily getting the treatment that you wanted them to get, they're going to get more opportunities. And I mean, they said wrestling the other week on Raw, like they were just allowed to say wrestling, and that was just like so groundbreaking. And I think it's just made it exciting again, I think, especially when you have been watching it for so long.
Yeah, it's exactly like you said then, when they mentioned the word wrestling, that's supposed to be like a no word, you know what I mean? Like me personally, I don't like to go in about it too much because it just sounds like I'm absolutely rubbish in the product, but it hasn't really spoke to me for a good while now, like probably a decade, maybe even a little bit more so. But I'm like you, a little disgruntled, but I'll still tune in. I watch Mania and everything like that. And
every year, WrestleMania, we always get sucked back in, and it's always a great show. And then you keep watching it, and you're like,
It's like you're waiting for something to happen, or exactly like you say, if someone doesn't get the push that everyone feels they deserve, it's like the universal thing, like, why aren't they getting a push, or why isn't this happening? But then again, I suppose that they can't really bow down to the fans every single time, because mid-carders have been champion every week. But we're hopeful for Triple H and see what that brings in the future. But speaking of the future, what do you think your future entails as a wrestler? Like, what have you got any plans? What are the goals, ambitions, or are you just loving it at the minute?
So all my goals and ambitions are very localized to New Zealand. I am not interested in pursuing this as an actual career or going overseas. I really like the balance that I have at the moment, where I wrestle every few weeks, So my goals are very much to be like a leader in the community and a leader in the scene, and to help grow IPW, grow how many fans are attending the shows, how many people we're getting into the training school, and just very much leaving it better than when I came in, like that's my big goal is elevating the company, and then also like cultivating a really positive and strong culture within the community.
Yeah, there's something really to respect about that, just what you were saying then, leaving it in a better position than what you found it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's, hats off to you as well for wanting to, help and not revolutionize, but you know what I mean, as in like really sculpt and mold New Zealand wrestling as well, because obviously it's quite a small country compared to, the giants sort of thing. But yeah, good enough. So what would your advice be to anyone, male or female, wanting to get a breakthrough into the wrestling business, maybe even in New Zealand? We'll stick with that.
It is a commitment. It is training weekly. It is training outside of wrestling. It's doing flyer runs and promoting all the shows. It requires a lot of dedication. So you've got to make sure that you're really into it. And also knowing kind of where you want to go with it. Like if you want to go overseas, then you really need to be training multiple times a week. If you just want to stay in New Zealand, then it's really important to have that balance and not get completely consumed by it. Otherwise, when you are kind of retiring from it, you know, you've lost a big chunk of your life. So it's just like having that balance, having a life outside of wrestling, I think is really important. But also like just sticking to it. It's a commitment, put in the hard work, ears open. Like I was very old school, but ears open, mouth shut.
Yeah, no.
Take in as much information from as many people as you can. Never stop learning, all those kind of things.
I mean, if it ain't broke, don't try to fix it. If the old technique of, you know, just listen up and actually take heed of anyone's advice that they're going to give you. But, you know, like in a few years' time or whatever, when you're, you know, you can be doing that to other people as well. So it's a real nice sort of, you know, in-ring circle. But like you said, try and not get consumed by it, because it could be, I can imagine it's going to be real hard on your body.
I understand it if you're wanting to pursue it as a career, because then it is your whole life, right? But a majority of people, realistically, it's not going to go anywhere further outside of New Zealand. And you just see so many people get consumed by it here. All their friends are wrestlers. Every weekend they're going to do wrestling, you know. I just don't think it's good for your mind. It's not good for your body. And then when wrestling is gone, like, well, what have you got left? You know, like you don't, it's always hard to see, you know, people come in and then get chewed up and spat out by it, you know?
Yeah. It's a nice one. It's a good note to finish on. Amber, thank you very much for your time. What's the next Impact Pro Wrestling show again? Sorry.
It's October 22nd, Mount Albert War Memorial Hall. If you go onto Impact Pro Wrestling New Zealand on Facebook and at IPW_NZ on Instagram, that's where you'll find all the information.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Amber, it's been lovely to talk to you, and best of luck for the next event.
Thank you. Thanks for chatting to me.